Hi there. In this lecture we see Emmanuel Lasker playing against David Janowski. This is in the Hastings tournament round 6. So Lasker kicks off with d4. We have d5, c4, e6, knight c3, knight f6. So a classic Queen's Gambit declined. Bishop g5, bishop e7, knight f3, black castles, e3, b6, rook c1, bishop b7, c takes d5, e takes d5, bishop d3, c5, white castles, knight bd7, d takes c5, and now knight takes c5. From a structural perspective, this gives black an isolated queen's pawn. Perhaps the hanging pawn structure is to be preferred. Sometimes this can be very dynamic with d4 later, with good preparation. But we have knight takes c5, bishop b1, rook c8. White has a comfortable blockading square on d4, but furthermore the rook itself is a target here with bishop f5. This is an annoyance. Knight e6, and now the bishop drops to h4, king h8. Here, if g6 as an example, bishop h3, this is a very pleasant position with a lot of pressure on the black position. If rook c5, knight e5, and we can see that sometimes f7 is under scrutiny along with this knight. Sometimes if knight h5, bishop takes, queen takes, this is helping white. Positionally white is getting a small advantage. But anyway, king h8 is played, and now knight e5. This is actually rather concrete. It vacates f3, and the queen could actually bounce like this, not only with the threat of bishop takes f6 and queen h7 mating, but also sometimes this battery itself for knight takes f7 and bishop takes e6. So very interesting tactical ideas stem from knight e5. Knight d4 is also interesting. For example, this position with queen f3 is also good. You know, white can just do this in this scenario to keep a skewer, as an example. So let's say black plays in a more sensible manner there and plays knight g8. White has queen h5 threatening checkmate, g6, bishop takes e6. This situation with queen e5 check, bishop f6, bishop takes f6, this is leading to a nice dark square blockade. Visually it seems very pleasant for white. White does have a big positional advantage here. It's an iron grip on the dark squares basically. So knight d4 is also, you know, it was interesting to consider, as well as knight e5 as played. So we have queen e8, queen f3, knight g8. So this looks at the h4 bishop. If h6 here, as an example, rook f d1, there's pressure on black structure. Queen h3 has venom here, but in this scenario, actually, black does have a resource, d4, funny enough. If e takes, knight f4, looking at the queen and g2. So white does have to tread carefully, looking at the concrete threats available. So yes, there are interesting resources here. So queen h3 is not actually that great here. So, you know, white has to find some other plan there. But let's look at also a6, queen h3. This will be a bit slow, demonstrating, you know, the threat of queen h7 mating. And also if h6, there's the other threat being demonstrated. So, you know, sometimes the queen coming to h3 is major without any downside, and sometimes it isn't. That's the complex nature of chess. But here, okay, we have a retreat, knight g8, which looks at the bishop on h4. Bishop g3, knight h6. This bishop drops back. f6. This is starting to weaken black's position a bit further. Knight d3, queen d7. Queen drops back. You know, some pawns don't go backwards, really, is the undertone here. And actually, after rook f d8, we have some simplification which increases the burden of pressure on black's remaining pieces to look after the weak pawns. But also, this looks like a structural threat to be, you know, and queen h5 seems already dangerous, you know, around the king. So we have a move which looks dreadful in terms of the principle. Pawns don't go backwards. Black played g5. Yeah, this just looks absolutely dreadful. But what does black actually do here? If d4, e takes, queen takes, we have bishop takes h6. And there's no time for taking the queen. Bishop takes g7. There's a good desperado. So say this situation, black is wrecked. And okay, black avoids getting mated, but it's still much better. Okay, after white parries the mate threat, white is much better. So, but g5, yeah, it looks dreadful, and it kind of is. Bishop g3 is played. There was also queen h5. That was also possible. You know, this situation is very pleasant for white. And if g takes there, queen takes threatens mate on h7. And this, you know, queen takes f4. Yeah, I mean, what does, yeah, otherwise, yeah, mating. So anyway, bishop g3, though, is a very good move. Bishop f8, queen d3. So there's a kind of overwhelming threats being generated here, not just against the weak pawns, but also against the king. And f5, another pawn, committal pawn move, weakening dark squares, weakening a lot of squares, trying to shut down this diagonal. Knight e2, the knight has fine blockade square on d4. We have bishop g7, knight d4, using that fine blockade square, rook f8. And it looks as though, you know, at one day when it's not queen takes h7, f4 might be a threat in the distant future. We have rook takes c8, queen takes c8, and here the concrete threat is actually bishop a6. So this is sidestepped by a nice little move against both bishop a6 and also against f4. What would you play here positionally for 10 points? It does seem like a cute little positional move of the game, and it also facilitates contesting the c-file. So okay, can you see? Cute little positional move, queen d2. Ticks a lot of boxes, avoids this, dissuades this, allows this. So, okay, we have rook f7, rook c1, going on that c-file, and that bishop guards c7, of course. Queen e8, h4, undermining black's pawns, trying to fix them even further. G takes. If we look at g4, this is horrendous for the dark square grip that white has. And white can even celebrate this, for example, with bishop f4 and g3. Totally iron grip on the dark squares with the adjacent light square pawns. It's a fascinating positioning. White does seem to be miles better, for example, and can build on the c-file without too much counterplay. The key thing, and also it's, you know, concrete stuff like bishop takes h6. It's concrete stuff which is emerging. Okay, so g takes h4 was played. Bishop takes. We have bishop c8. The pieces, in trying to attend to the weak pawns, are actually making themselves vulnerable in their own right here. We see bishop g3, which is a very supportive move of key squares, which could be dangerous for black. And in fact, this is shown immediately after knight g4. Guess what white plays here with a huge advantage. So a great tactical move in this position is played. And, you know, after this, you know, black's on the way out. Okay, so it's really great, actually. 200 points. What does white play here? It's a really great move. Black can't get away with all these weakening pawn moves. Knight b5. So saying, look, if you take this, you know, we're going to take on c8. And then, you know, if a rooks come off, we've got things like bishop takes f5. Once we remove this key defender, you know, f5 is going to fall. We have rook f8. If queen takes b5, let's put this on the board. Rook takes c8. And actually, even stronger than anything else here, well, here we have queen d4 check. And that's a kind of meltdown of the black position here. What does black do? If knight f6, bishop e5 is super strong. But there's also, you know, various undermining shots. If king g8, there's an undermining shot in bishop takes f5, undermining g4. For example, this looks horrendous and is horrendous. And if rook d7, let's look at rook d7, then bishop takes f5. If bishop e6, then knight d6. It's funny, yes, that the strain on the pieces here led up to this awkward configuration, which, you know, has downsides in its own right, and that, you know, clinging on to f5 in particular rather than d5. But yeah, knight b5 is such a crushing tactical blow. It's a real beauty of a move. So yes, black played rook f8, but now knight d6, queen e6, and then now another amazing, crushing tactical blow from Lasker. He's really, really accurate in his crushing, punishing tactics. So this move for 100 points, what would you play here? What a brilliant game. It has to be said. Rook takes c8, yeah. That f5 is a super painful common square picked up on. A common square between the knight and bishop. Rook takes, bishop takes f5, ending the game. Ouch, what a skewer, a double attack, all in one. If queen g8, we can just take on c8, it's protected by the knight as well. Crushing, absolutely crushing stuff. Really instructive games. So this Hastings tournament was one of the most prestigious tournaments held in chess up until that time. You know, some of the strongest players in the world. Janowski, one of the strongest players in the world, and absolutely demolished in this game. One thing is, okay, you might ask, well, Lasker actually came third in this tournament. The Shining Light of Pillsbury came first, yeah, that is true. And there was a playoff tournament after, which Lasker won later on. But it's said that Lasker was suffering from the effects of typhoid fever, yeah, the health issues at the time. And maybe if he wasn't like suffering at the start of the tournament, especially perhaps, he would have done a little bit better than third. But third was still very respectable. And, you know, there's some excellent games shown here. So this is like round 6. So I think he's starting a good recovery of his typhoid fever. You know, this is a great game in round 6, in my view. So positionally, you know, starting about weak pawns and how pieces can get to awkward configurations, and look out for how you can exploit those configurations tactically, and look out for the tactical moves. So it's like positional and tactical, this game. And even though there's some retreat moves, it did kind of invite committal pawn moves. So these retreating moves going back to base seems a bit strange, and then some simplification which further weakens and puts strain on the pieces. And yeah, more committal pawn moves, more strain. And yeah, again, simplification, more strain. Great move from so many perspectives, queen d2. And then, yeah, the strain on the position is being felt here hugely. Knight g4 weakened f5, one move like that, and the position is being destroyed, you know, with knight b5. It really has been destroyed. Amazing stuff, really inspirational. I hope you enjoyed this game as much as me. Thanks so much.